Hi kids, Chapter 16, The Boxcar Children, Yellow House Mystery. Chapter 16 is called A Happy Home. The family had not gone very far when suddenly Joe stopped the car by the side of the road. "What's the matter?" asked Henry. "Bill's getting too tired," answered Joe. "This is all too much of a change for him. I'm going to fix a bed on the back seat so he can lie down." Benny looked up at Bill and saw it was true. The old man was very white and his hands were shaking. "Oh dear," said Jessie. "We talked to him too much. He just isn't used to it." She and Alice helped Joe make a soft bed of blankets on the back seat. Bill did not say a word. Joe and Henry took his arms and helped him out of the front seat and into the back. Bill lay down at once, shut his eyes, as if he were very glad to lie down. The three girls took the middle seat and Henry got up in front beside Benny. "He'll be all right," said Joe, looking back at Bill. "You can talk all you want to. I think he'll sleep." "Let's send that telegram to Grandfather at the next village," said Jessie. "What shall we say?" 10 words, said Benny. "No, you can send 15, said Henry. "Let's make up a telegram as we ride. We should certainly begin. Found Bill and the money." 5 words, said Violet, counting. "All coming home today," said Jessie. "That's 4 more, 9 so far." "Then we can have 6 more words. We ought to say, we may be late for supper." So, have you figured out that a telegram is a type of sending a message? It's before the internet existed, and it was a message that would be delivered to your house. People would call from one station to another, and the message would be typed out and delivered to you, but you had to use only a certain number of words, just sort of like tweeting. "We certainly will be late for supper," said Joe. Then Alice said, "Benny, don't you think we should say something about Bill, like weak and tired? And then Mrs. McGregor won't expect the big, strong man who used to lift the boat." Benny counted on his fingers for a few minutes. Then he cried, "We can say it this way. Found Bill and money. Bill very weak. All coming home today late for supper. Hello." "Wonderful, Benny," said Joe, laughing. "Your grandfather will know you made up that telegram for sure. I always like to say hello at the end of a telegram." Henry said, "Now, Benny, don't forget what you said. Keep saying it over and over until we come to the village." This gave Benny something to do to keep himself busy. And when they did stop at a village, he could remember every word. As the girl wrote down the telegram, Jessie cried, "Henry, let's say it's from the Boxcar Children." There is Benny giving the lady the words he wants to say so she can send the telegram to the next station. The girl stopped writing and looked up in surprise. "Are you the 4 children who lived in the boxcar?" she asked. "We sure did, and we had fun too." "And you found your grandfather at last," she cried. She looked from one smiling face to another. "I read about you in the paper, but I never expected to meet you." "This telegram's going to our grandfather, and you can say it's from the Boxcar Children, please. And Alice and Joe, too. He'll know." "Yes, I guess he will," laughed the girl. "I'll send it off right now. It'll get to him in an hour." "Fine," said Henry, paying for the telegram. "Now let's get on our way." Bill was still asleep when they got into the station wagon again. He was still asleep at lunch. They did not wake him up for lunch. "He needs sleep more than food now," said Joe. "I do hope he doesn't get sick," said Alice in a worried voice. "I don't think he will get sick. I think he's just had too much excitement. It's such a change from not talking at all." "It shows us we'll have to be very careful of Bill," said Jessie. "I can hardly wait to ask him the end of that story." Bill slept almost all the afternoon, and as they came near home, they had to wake him up. When they drove up to the door of their grandfather's giant house, Bill was sitting up very straight. Mr. Alden was sitting on the porch in a big chair. Beside him was Mrs. McGregor. They were waiting. Bill leaned forward to look. It's my Margaret, he said, almost crying. She has the same beautiful blue eyes. Joe and Henry helped the old man out of the car and up the steps. Bill, cried Margaret. She put both arms around him and led him to her chair. It's all right, Bill, it's all right. She just kept saying over and over, it's all right, Bill, it's all right. Can you imagine not seeing your husband or wife for 40 years? And he thought she was dead. Just then there was a loud noise from upstairs. It seemed to be coming from Jesse's room. It was Watch. Do you guys remember Watch the dog? They couldn't take the dog camping. He came rushing down the stairs and out the door, barking and barking. He could not believe that his children had come back to him again. At last he lay down by Jesse's feet, tired out. Now I guess he'll have to start eating again, said Mr. Alden. As for Mrs. McGregor, she hasn't eaten a good meal since you all went away. So that's evidence that the children being away had affected Watch the dog and Mrs. McGregor. They didn't have much of an appetite. They were lonesome for the kids. Benny said, I think it's funny. We have so many people that can't eat. I don't have any trouble eating. Now that we're all together again, Benny, said his grandfather, laughing, everyone will be all right. I think I shall eat better myself, too. We have things for supper that you all like best. There's a hamburger for you. Bill always liked fish best, and that's what he'll have. There's ham for Joe, an apple pie for Jesse. No pie for me? What do you think, teased his grandfather. I don't believe anyone will go hungry tonight. It was wonderful to see Bill eat with his Margaret beside him. He seemed like a different man. I feel better and better each day, he said. After supper, the family sat again outside on the porch. Joe, whispered Benny, couldn't we talk to Bill now? He seems all right to me. You can try, said Joe. We'll soon see how he takes it. He can stop if he gets too upset. Benny went over then to Bill and Margaret. He put his hand over Bill's hand. We want to ask you just a few more things, Bill, unless you're too tired. No, little boy, said Bill. I don't think I shall ever be tired again. Ask me anything you want. Benny looked at Joe. Joe smiled at Benny. Then Benny said, we want to know something more about your brother. How was he going to make the money 3 times as much? I didn't know myself at first, answered Bill, but later I found out he was going to give it to some friend of his to bet on the horse races. Oh, but he might have lost it all, cried Henry. Yes, I know that now, said Bill. His friends were bad people. I'm afraid Sam would have been all right if his friends had let him alone. But he always did what his bad friends told him. And I always did what my brother Sam said. He looked around sadly. One night after Sam was killed, these men came up to Maine. They hunted all over my house, but they couldn't find the money. I didn't know where the tin box was myself, but they didn't believe me. They tried to make me tell, and we had a great big fight. But at last they went away, and I never saw them again. Were they the ones who told you the barn was burned? Asked Mr. Alden. Yes, they didn't want me to go home and tell all that I knew, so they told me you were dead, Margaret. I suppose that finished you off, right? Said Benny. Bill smiled. Yep, that finished me off. I didn't want to live anymore without my Margaret, and I didn't want to see any people. Besides, I couldn't come home without the money. So I went deep into the woods to live alone forever. I'm so glad we found you, said Jessie suddenly. Supposing we'd never asked to go into the little yellow house on Surprise Island. Now you and Mrs. McGregor can live right here in her rooms, can't they, Grandfather? Well, if her rooms are big enough, said Mr. Alden. 3 rooms ought to be big enough for 2 people, said Mrs. McGregor happily. I can help with the horses, said Bill. Do you still have horses? Yes, we have 2, answered Mr. Alden. But you will rest a long time before going back to do any work. Darkness began to fall. The birds began to sing their evening songs. The family sat quietly for a minute and listened. Then Violet said, "Isn't this a happy house, Alice? You and Joe so happy on the top floor. Bill and Mrs. McGregor will be in their own little rooms. And don't forget us, with all our mysteries solved, and now we're back to Grandfather. And we'll go and live in the little yellow house on Surprise Island every summer." "Hold on, my boy, not so fast," said Mr. Alden. "That's Bill's house." "Oh, yeah, so it is. Well then, he and Mrs. McGregor can live in it every summer, and we can go over and see them." "Well, we'll see," said Mr. Alden with a smile. Violet suddenly put her hand on her grandfather's knee, looked up into his kind face. She could not see very well, for it had grown quite dark, but she knew he was smiling at her. "Grandfather," she said, "couldn't you use some of that money we found to fix up the little yellow house on Surprise Island? It's so dusty and the chairs are so old." "Why, that's a fine idea," said Mr. Alden, taking her small hand in his big one. "We could buy a lot of chairs with that money. And by the way, where is the money?" "Right here," said Jessie. And there's a picture of Jessie handing her grandfather the money. Henry and Violet and Benny right beside Mr. Alden. "Right here," said Jessie. She took it out of her handbag and gave it to Mr. Alden. "Maybe Bill and I could paper and paint the rooms before school begins," said Henry. "Oh, we could all paint," shouted Benny, jumping around. "Let's paint the outside too." "That would be fun," said Alice. "Joe and I could help every day after work on the cave." "Right now, you children have something new to think about," said Joe. "We'll take a lunch over every day and work until we get the house all fixed up." Violet sat down beside her grandfather in his great big chair. He moved over quickly to make room for her, put his arm around her. "I'm glad the little yellow house isn't a sad place to you anymore, Grandfather," she said, leaning her head back against his arm. "It's going to be a happy place again." "We'll still paint it yellow, though," said Benny. "Ho-hum. What does ho-hum mean this time, Ben?" asked Henry, laughing at his brother. Mrs. McGregor answered, smiling at Bill. "To me, that ho-hum means, 'Thank you, children.'" Mr. Alden said, "To me it means, 'I'm very glad you're all home again.'" "Well, what I really mean is that I can hardly wait until tomorrow to paint that little yellow house." And that is the end of the Yellow House mystery. Mystery solved, money found, Bill McGregor found and returned to his wife. I hope you all enjoyed that lovely Boxcar children's story as much as I did. Be well.